For decades, the truth sat locked in boxes, while the world was told Africa had no ancient kings.
This was the beating heart of southern Africa's gold trade centuries before the first European ship arrived. Each fragment unearthed was a rebuke to centuries of silence.
What happens when a discovery challenges the story of an empire?
Beneath a sun-blasted plateau in the far north of South Africa, where three rivers twist like serpents toward the horizon, a silence hides a secret. Tourists who climb the rocky hill today see only stone foundations and dry scrub. But 800 years ago, this was a city of gold more dazzling than any European kingdom had imagined. A place where elephant tusks were traded for Chinese porcelain, where royals sat atop thrones gilded with beaten metal. And then it vanished. When British colonials stumbled upon the ruins in the 1930s, they unearthed a treasure so extraordinary it threatened to rewrite history. Gold scepters, carved rhino figurines, delicate beads older than London's first bridge. Yet almost as quickly as it was uncovered, the site was sealed, its story muted. Because this city proved that long before colonization, southern Africa had produced a civilization rivaling Egypt, India, and China. And the colonial powers did not want that narrative told. Today, Mapungubwe sits in UNESCO's register, but for decades it was a secret. Its burial grounds were looted, its artifacts locked in vaults, its descendants silenced. How did an empire rise on a windswept hill, command a continent's wealth, and then vanish into a footnote, only to have its rediscovery buried again? And who exactly benefited from erasing it? Long before the Dutch arrived at the Cape or British soldiers marched inland, the Limpopo Valley was a crossroads. By the 10th century, traders moved ivory, iron, and glass beads along networks stretching from the Swahili coast to India and China. On a sandstone hill above the confluence of the Limpopo and Shash rivers, a settlement took shape. By the 13th century, Mapungubwe was the capital of a kingdom spanning tens of thousands of square kilometers. Excavations revealed terraced stone walls, elite burial grounds, and a palace complex perched above commoners' huts. Gold objects, bangles, beads, scepters, were not mere trinkets but symbols of divine kingship. Scholars now see Mapungubwe as the prototype for Great Zimbabwe and other southern African states. But colonial narratives taught generations that Africa south of the Sahara had no true civilizations. When University of Pretoria researchers began digging in the 1930s, they were stunned to find evidence of a sophisticated, stratified society flourishing centuries before Europeans arrived. The discovery contradicted the racial ideology underpinning apartheid. So although papers were published, the most startling finds, especially royal burials, were hidden in museum vaults, access restricted. Meanwhile, local communities, descendants of the very people who built Mapungubwe, were fenced out. Farmers grazed cattle on the ruins. Grave goods were stolen. The hill became a ghost site, known only to a few archaeologists and looters. Hints of what lay beneath filtered into the public, rumors of gold, of skeletons buried in regal poses, but never the full story. Foreshadowing of a larger cover-up glimmered in memos between officials, warning that the finds should be handled with discretion. The story of Mapungubwe's suppression begins in earnest in 1932, when a prospector named E.S.J. Van Graan and his son scaled the hill looking for fossils, and instead found ancient beads scattered like spilled stars. Digging with picks, they uncovered gold bangles and a tiny rhinoceros figurine hammered from a single sheet of metal. Word reached the University of Pretoria, which quickly dispatched an excavation team. At first, academics were electrified. Here was evidence of long-distance trade: Chinese celadon, Indian glass, Islamic glassware, and thousands of gold beads. Royal graves, sealed in layers of clay, showed a clear social hierarchy. But as the implications sank in, enthusiasm turned to discomfort. If Africans had built a powerful, wealthy state centuries before Europeans, the myth of a primitive continent collapsed. This threatened not just academic theory, but the ideological foundation of white supremacy in South Africa. Archival letters show curators fretting about misinterpretation of the finds. The gold rhino and scepters were quietly stored away. Publications downplayed African agency, suggesting an outside influence. Access to the site was limited. For decades, textbooks ignored Mapungubwe or framed it as a mystery culture. Meanwhile, local voices were excluded. The hill was declared state land. Communities who traced their ancestry there were pushed out or hired as laborers on digs. Oral histories that could have illuminated the site were dismissed as folklore. The imbalance of power was stark. The descendants were denied the story of their own ancestors while museums curated the treasures in secret. Each year, more artifacts emerged. Thousands of gold beads, fragments of carved ivory, pottery bearing symbols unseen elsewhere. Yet each discovery deepened the contradiction between evidence and the colonial narrative. Like a pot boiling under a sealed lid, pressure built. In the 1960s and 70s, whispers of a buried kingdom circulated in universities abroad. Journalists occasionally hinted at a cover-up but were stonewalled. For the apartheid regime, acknowledging Mapungubwe meant acknowledging African statehood and sophistication, a dangerous precedent. But the country would wake up to something far worse. By the late 1980s, South Africa's political landscape was shifting. Archaeologists, emboldened by international scrutiny, began revisiting Mapungubwe with new methods. Ground-penetrating radar revealed terraces, stone walls, and an elite precinct far larger than first thought. Radiocarbon dating pushed the site's peak back to around 1220–1290 CE, centuries before Great Zimbabwe. Inside sealed storage, curators reopened crates untouched for decades. Out spilled thousands of gold beads, fragments of scepters, and the famous rhino, its horn broken but its symbolism intact. Papers long suppressed showed clear evidence. Mapungubwe was the seat of a stratified African kingdom engaged in international trade at a scale rivaling medieval Europe. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Conferences abroad showcased the artifacts. UNESCO moved to protect the site. South Africans who had been taught their ancestors were primitive saw proof of kingship, artisanship, and long-distance diplomacy. Yet with recognition came anger. Why had this been hidden? How many artifacts had been stolen or sold? Community groups demanded repatriation of remains and grave goods. Dramatic scenes unfolded as boxes of human bones were returned from university basements to be reburied with ceremony. Elders wept over relics they had been told never existed. The gold rhino, once a secret, became a national symbol printed on banknotes. But Mapungubwe's story is still one of erasure as much as glory. Bulldozers had cut through parts of the site for a road. Farmers had plowed over graves. Looters had stripped burial mounds. The cover-up wasn't just bureaucratic. It was physical. Every missing artifact is a hole in the record. Walking the hill today, you can still see pottery shards glinting in the dust. The wind carries the echo of a bustling city. Smiths hammering gold, traders haggling, children playing in courtyards. Then silence. What force, drought, political upheaval, shifting trade routes ended Mapungubwe's reign remains debated. But the deliberate silencing of its rediscovery is no mystery at all. That was a choice. This is the moment in the story when the lid blows off. A kingdom richer than Egypt, hidden for half a century, bursts back into view. The cliffhanger is not whether Mapungubwe existed. It did. But whether the full truth will ever be restored. Today, Mapungubwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a point of pride for South Africans. But the legacy of its suppression lingers. Museum displays still grapple with how to present artifacts taken from graves without consent. Many descendants feel the reburials came too late. Scholars are rewriting history, but gaps remain where looted items disappeared into private collections. The broader significance is staggering. Mapungubwe rewrites the narrative of Southern Africa, proving complex state formation, long-distance trade, and gold-working flourished centuries before colonization. It undermines myths of empty land and civilizing missions. It also forces historians to confront how knowledge itself can be colonized, excavated but then buried again when inconvenient. For viewers, the haunting question is not just how Mapungubwe rose and fell, but how its erasure shaped modern perceptions. What other stories lie locked in vaults or beneath farmland, hidden because they challenge power? When we look at the gold rhino on a banknote, are we seeing a reclaimed heritage or a token offered in place of full truth? Perhaps the most chilling lesson of all is that history's deadliest weapon is not fire or conquest, but silence. The city on the hill still whispers through the scrub. Will we listen? Beneath a scorched South African hill lies the ruins of a city once richer than Egypt, a kingdom of gold, trade, and power the British tried to erase. For decades, its treasures were hidden in vaults and its story silenced. This is the lost kingdom of Mapungubwe, a civilization whose existence rewrites everything you thought you knew about Africa's past.